While we're finding our seats and all that, I just want to share a little story that I heard today that's mildly relevant to the teaching today. So I don't know if it's really a story. It sounds like a little bit more legend to me, but still I thought it was interesting. So anyways, this fellow is driving, and this is in the UK. He's driving up this road, up this mountain towards this monastery. And all of a sudden, his car breaks down right by the monastery. And so he goes into the monastery and he knocks on the door and he says, "I'm sorry, my car broke down. Do you think I could stay the night here until I can get help or whatnot?" And so the monks, they graciously accept him and they feed him dinner and they even fix this guy's car. So as this guy tries to fall asleep, all of a sudden he hears something. He hears this strange, haunting sound. It just grips him. And he's like, "What is that?" And this sound, it just keeps going on. It just ravishes his soul, and he's just totally perplexed by it. Well, anyways, the next morning, he asks the monks, "What's that sound?" But they say, "Well, we can't tell you because you're not a monk." And so the man he's disappointed, but he thanks him anyway, and he goes on his merry way. Well, a couple of years later, the guy's in the same area visiting, and he's once again driving up the mountain to the monastery, and once again his car can't handle it, and it breaks down in front of the monastery again. And so once again the monks welcome him in. It's, "Oh, welcome back," and same thing. They accept him in, they feed him, and again they fix his car. And that night, while he's staying there with him again, once again he hears that sound, this amazing sound that just ravishes his attention. He's like, "What is that? I've never heard anything like that." And it was the same noise, the same sound that he had heard years earlier. Well, again, the next morning he asks, "What is that? I have to know. What is this glorious sound that I'm hearing? It just captures my soul." But the monks reply, "I'm sorry, we can't tell you because you're not a monk here." And the man says, all right, I'm dying to know. I have to know what this thing is. And if the only way I can find out what this sound is to become a monk, well, then how do I become a monk? So the monks replied, "Well, you have to go on a quest. And as part of your quest, you're going to have to travel all over God's creation. And then we need you to physically count, every stream and river that you see. And then as well, we need you to count every single mountain peak that you see. And then once you do that, you'll finish your quest. You'll become one with creation. You'll become a monk." So this guy, he sets out to this task and ends up being 34 years later that he finally completes this quest to become this monk. So he returns to the monastery and he knocks on the door. He says, "All right, I've completed my quest. I've traveled the earth and I found what you asked for." And he said, there are 14,284,232 streams and rivers that I counted. And there were 53,622 mountain peaks that I counted. And so the monks reply, "Well, congratulations. You've completed your quest and you're now a monk. So now we're going to show you to that thing that you've been longing to know. We're going to show you what we're going to lead you to that sound that has ravished your attention and captured your heart." So the monks lead the man to this wooden door towards this series of corridors where the head monk says, "The sound is right behind the door. Just keep following it. Finish your quest." So the man reaches for the door, reaches for the knob, but the door is locked, and he's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, real funny here. May I have the key, please?" So the monks give him the key, and he opens the door. And then behind that wooden door is another door, but this door is made of stone. So the man asks for the key for the stone door. Monks give it to him, and he opens it, only to find this next door. But this next door is encrusted with beautiful rubies. It's absolutely amazing. So he says, "Can I have the key to this one?" And they provide it. And behind that door is another one made of sapphire. And so it went until the man had gone through this series of doors and this corridors of this monastery with doors inlaid with emeralds and silvers and topaz and amethysts. And finally the monks say to him, "Okay, this is the last key to the last door." And the man is relieved to know that he has finally reached the end. So he unlocks the door and he turns the knob, and behind the door, there it is. He sees it. He beholds it. He's absolutely amazed and enravished. It's like, that's it. That's the sound that I've been searching for. This is the sound that has ravished my heart. Now I know what it is. But he can't tell you because you're not a monk. I thought that was good. I don't know. Today we're going to talk about Revelation. So last Sunday, on Epiphany Sunday, we talked about baptism. Now, Epiphany on the church calendar, it remembers and it celebrates the revealing of Jesus. So we remember through the story of his baptism, of the revelation of his identity. We remember through the story of the journey of the Magi to see the Christ child, and that's about the revelation of Jesus to the Gentiles. And then we remember through the story of the wedding at Cana, which is the first revelation of Jesus and the power of the kingdom, revealing his ministry. So this morning we're going to talk about receiving a revelation of Jesus. It's one thing to learn the facts about someone, but it's quite another to have an epiphany, to receive a revelation of who someone is. I kind of liken it to the experience of knowing someone casually. You know, for example, oh, hey, my buddy John Doe over there. You know, I see him at church every once in a while. We say hi by the coffee pot and so forth. But, you know, just kind of casually. But then once later you get together and you say, like, play some games together, maybe Settlers of Catan or something like that. Then you receive a revelation into much more of who this person is as you sit down, you interact through that game. So by revelation, I'm referring to something more than just extra facts, although it can sometimes include that. But I'm referring to a deep, intuitive level knowing about a person's identity, about their hopes, about their motivations, and about their ways, to use a biblical term. A true revelation, as opposed to just a keen insight, it involves something deeper, more profound, even mysterious, namely the activity of the Holy Spirit to reveal things that are hidden in plain sight. Well, evidence through scriptural and historical witness, as well as our own experiences, we know that this kind of revelation of Jesus is something that can certainly transform your life for the better, for the ultimate good. Well, in line with the celebration of Epiphany, we're going to use the text from John chapter 2 about Jesus at the wedding at Cana. This is one of my favorite gospel stories, and this is, of course, many people's favorite miracle or sign that Jesus performed. This is where he changed the water into wine. And I think it's a great one. I mean, raising the dead and whatnot, that's great. But if you want to make some friends, I mean, this miracle is where it's at. And I think we'll actually practice this miracle after the message, because it's our church growth plan for 2018. So, and in unrelated news, we might need some more Freedom Session facilitators. Anyways, John chapter 2, let's dig in and read this story. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it out. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. And the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you've kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. In the village culture of first century Palestine, weddings were very, very important events. They were announced well in advance, and they were recognized by the entire village. Now, in some respects, weddings were the chief celebrations that were enjoyed during their year. Now, since Cana is a nearby village to Jesus' family home, some scholars suspect that this wedding was that of some close friends or possibly some relatives, more likely some relatives or some cousins of the family, which is how they got invited. And while not explicit in the text, there's some light inference that Jesus' mother, Mary, had some sort of significant connection to the couple. And she possibly was even involved in some minor role in the wedding. The text says this. I find this interesting. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. Jesus and his disciples appear to be present, at least partly, by virtue of their connection to another person, namely Mary. Well, what ends up happening at the wedding, which benefits all the guests and saves the bridegroom from significant shame and provides a significant revelation for a few, all this happened because someone was connected to Jesus, and he was invited into the situation. If there was no connection and no invitation, things in this scene would have gone much, much differently. But Jesus was present, and it changed everything. I can't help but to relate this to our own situations with this thing that we see in the story here. By nature of our relationship with Jesus, he's with us wherever we go. What could possibly happen with Jesus present? What might we end up seeing? We might one day be the intermediary who brings Jesus into a situation. Well, like every good story, our story is predicated on a conflict or a problem. Mary says to Jesus, "They have no wine. They ran out." Now, aside from the shame and the disgrace with the guests and the bride's family, the problem here is multiple. Number one, they have no wine. Number two, they ran out of wine. And number three, the wine's all gone. Can you see the dilemma? We need Jesus' help here. So here our apparent problem is it's very practical. It's a non-spiritual need. And the religious irony in our Bible story is that they need more wine here. One of the things that I really like about this story is that it speaks to this question. Is Jesus really interested in the commonplace, simple conundrums of everyday living? Well, our wedding story here reveals that Jesus says, yeah, he is. We can invite him into dilemmas that seem ridiculously practical and dilemmas that seem embarrassingly inconsequential, and we can ask him for help. And he responds. Now, from the story, we see the practical problem is going to receive a better solution, a solution bigger than and beyond the problem. Well, Jesus does provide a lot of wine. He also provides a lot more than that. And we'll get to that in more detail in a moment here. So Jesus' response to the problem after Mary says, hey, they're out of wine here. His response to the problem, it shows that he's not uncaring or indifferent to the genuine need, but we do see Jesus shifting the focus to the big picture, to address the need, yes, that you know about, and especially the need you don't. When a need arises, it's easy to allow that problem to dominate our thinking, to become the center of attention, and to captivate our focus. But Jesus, in his response, he makes it clear that he's not going to be guided by human pressures, even if the person applying the pressure is his own mother. He says about the problem, what is it to you and me? Which is a Hebrew idiom, which is used to create a respectful distance here. What is this to you and me? Hold on here. Because in some sense, Mary is presuming on her relationship with him as her son. Yet here we see Jesus redefining the situation. He says to Mary, "My hour has not yet come." Now, it's a theologically loaded statement here that's looking forward to the cross and kind of carrying us through the whole gospel here. But what we see here is that for Jesus, there's a big issue with the timing. Now, it's not so much a matter of, it's only 8:30 now, we need to wait till 9 p.m. to work up a good miracle. It's not that. He's not some sort of miracle max. You can't rush a miracle, or you're going to get bad miracles. Anybody remember that from Princess Bride? Okay. 2 of us found that funny, anyways. But as is typical with Jesus, he adds a deep layer of symbolism to the current events that he's in. He's relating the current request to provide wine to the message of the prophets that characterize the Messianic age, with the image as the time when wine would flow liberally. So this provision of wedding wine is a sign of what's to come. But the time is not yet for the real thing. The hour has not yet come. You see, Mary just wants the wedding to end without embarrassment. But Jesus is thinking about the big picture. He's thinking about the timing of revealing his identity and the present turning point in history, which is right there in front of their eyes. And notice some of the other timing here within the story. For a few people, they get to see what's going on. They get to receive the revelation of who Jesus is, and they get to see how this could change everything. Their hour has come, so to speak. And now for most of the others, though, they're completely oblivious to what has happened and who's among them. They're eating, they're drinking, they're having a great time, which is what you should do at a wedding celebration. But the thing is that their hour has not yet come, so to speak. It's not the time for the revelation to be revealed to them. Well, let's focus in on the few people that did see and to whom Jesus was revealed. How did it happen for them? How were they able to receive a revelation of Jesus when others did not? Who is it? So let's look at it. Who is it in the story that received the revelation? Let's see what we can learn here. Well, in the story, we know it's not the honored guests who receive it. It's not the banquet master, which is odd. He's a pretty important dude. And it's not even the bridegroom, who's at the center of the wedding. Who in the story receives the revelation? That's right. The servants know. The servants knew. And it appears in verse 11 that the disciples also knew. But the servants knew. Well, how did they know? And what can we learn from them? Well, we see 2 things from the text. First, we see this, glaringly obvious. They're with Jesus. That's how they knew. They're with Jesus. They've got the timing and the position. They're in the right place at the right time. And here's the thing that something that we can learn here from this story with Jesus. If you're with Jesus, You're in the right place at the right time. Think about that. If you're with Jesus, you're in the right place at the right time. All the time. And when you're with Jesus in the right place and the right time, anything can happen. Anything can happen. Heaven can touch earth. We're more likely to receive when we're with the giver. Okay, once again, how did they know? Well, next, we see this. Because they did whatever he told them. Remember how Mary, after Jesus was like, well, hold on here. She's like to the servants, do whatever he tells you. And they did. They did whatever he told them. At the very heart of the kingdom of God is that his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And here's the deal. When you do the king's business, you get to see the king. You see the king in action. You see what he's about. You learn how he ticks. You learn what drives his heart. The servants knew because it was through their hands that Jesus did the work of power. You notice how Jesus didn't do anything other than says, hey, you do this. They did it, and the work of power was done through their hands. Obedience to Jesus produces miraculous results. If we're obedient to do it, we'll be able to see it. Now, there's some things that you can only see and really know from actually doing them. I mean, an example I like to give is you can read all the books you want about driving a car and all that. It's not until you get behind the wheel that all of a sudden you kind of learn, like, whoa, that gas pedal's kind of sensitive. And they didn't tell me that in the book. It's like, whoa, this thing kind of turns a little fast. And then you step on the brakes, you plow your face into the dashboard. I'm not going to do that again. Some things you can only see and really know by actually doing them, by actually participating in them. And Jesus invites us into that very thing. He invites us into that kind of deep revelation. Jesus invites us to join him in what he's doing. And he does that so that we can know not just his works, but that so we can also know his heart. Now notice the instructions that Jesus gives to these servants who knew. Fill the jars with water. Draw some out. Give it to the banquet master. That's it. Isn't that simple? It's so simple. And we see Jesus doing it like that time and time again. No hoopla, no fuss, no big show or display. Simple instructions, simple obedience. So often the task to which Jesus calls us, through which he reveals himself, is something so simple, if not just mundane and ordinary. I mean, I think of the many examples of what we believe he's asked us to do here over the years. Go, share some meals. Give some clothing. Listen. Pray, encourage, clean, help someone move, celebrate, mentor. Rocket science, eh? You see, Jesus is accessible to anyone. Anyone can do these simple things, and he invites us all into this. So that we know not just his works, but that so we can also know his heart. In the midst of simple things, being near him and doing what he says, we can see him and we can know him. I think again to the Tegler Christmas dinner that we did over at Iverdent School just a few weeks ago. We did some simple tasks there. We put on their nice orange Hope Mission aprons and so forth. What do? We seated some guests. Pretty simple. We plated some food. Pretty simple. We served folks some food. Simple. Had some nice conversations and connected with our neighbors. And during that evening, we imparted a lot of hope and a lot of love. We demonstrated God's love to our neighborhood in a very practical way. We're acting as ambassadors of Jesus. We were representing Jesus to the neighborhood. And during this event, I had a few moments there where I just got a glimpse of it, where I could see Jesus in the midst of these precious moments. God, you're at work in this connection here with this other person. Lord, I can see that you're imparting hope here where there was no hope. Lord, I can see that you're imparting comfort to where there's great loneliness. Wait a minute, that's your heart. We get these glimpses of what he's doing and what he's about. And this is just another example of just from some of the simple things that we do. And yet God's at work, revealing himself to us and to them. Well, sometimes in order to see something, we need to be prompted on what to look for before we can actually see it. This last year when Karis and I, that would be October of 2016 actually, Karis and I went on our 20th wedding anniversary trip. And as part of our trip, we did this little exploration of this cave that was quite far underground. And within this cave, there's this waterfall coming out of the wall. It's this really interesting place. And our tour guide said, kind of look at that wall and tell me, what do you see? They're just like, oh, yeah, I see that waterfall there going into the pool. It's very beautiful and so forth. He says, I want you to look at that same waterfall, but we're going to do a little trick. We're going to look at it in 2 dimensions. And I want you to focus your phone. So have your camera ready. Focus your phone right over there in 2 dimensions. So I focused my phone camera over there looking on the screen. I was like, whoa, I did not see that. And when you look at it in 2 dimensions on the wall, there's the rock formation looks like a face. Like it's creepy. Like eyes with these perfect eyebrows and this nose and this mouth, and the water from the waterfall coming out of the wall is actually coming through one of the eyes. But if I hadn't been told to look there and what to look for, I would have never seen it. But when he told me, wait a minute, just hold up your phone here and look at this from a different perspective, from 2 dimensions here, all of a sudden it's like, oh, there it is. There's that face in the wall. Well, sometimes as Jesus reveals himself, it helps to be prompted in a few places what can we look for here and what is it saying to us? So, and again in our story, typical of Jesus, he's using a current situation to reveal something that has been hidden. He's using a current situation to reveal who he is and to point to these Old Testament prophetic promises and their fulfillment. This wedding feast in Cana provides the setting into which he can tie in the wedding imagery that's used within the Old Testament, where you can start to capture the imaginations of the people who are familiar with their scriptures. You see, when the Jews reflected on what heaven or the arrival of the Messiah would be like, they often thought of banquets, particularly wedding banquets. We see this frequently in the scriptures. The divine action of Jesus at this wedding is this declaration, speaking into the imagination, speaking into their history. It's a declaration that Jesus is the Messiah who is promised. The bridegroom, even, as he sometimes referred to himself, the bridegroom has arrived. He's here. The wedding's on. We're at a special moment here in history, and he uses this wedding to reveal that of himself. He uses this wedding to reveal that he is the fulfillment of the promise that God would dwell among his people. The bridegroom is here. He's the fulfillment of the promise that God would come to save his people. And it's foreshadowing his coming again at the end of the age, where we shall all gather together at the marriage supper of the Lamb and celebrate the final victory of God, where he sets everything right, where we are in his presence face to face forevermore. Every sign that Jesus performed is a demonstration, a revelation of some truth about who he is. Now, changing the water into wine, as awesome as it is, and as much as I'd love to learn it, changing the water into wine, it demonstrates the creative and transforming power of Jesus. John chapter 1, at the beginning of his gospel, John tells us, he says, through him all things were made. Without him, nothing was made. In the Genesis story, in the Genesis creation story, we hear that God turns darkness into light. God changes chaos into order. God changes barrenness into fruitfulness. This sign displays yet another clear picture of God's grand plan for all things, for all time. Jesus will transform. Jesus will transform. He's doing it right in front of their eyes. He will transform and he will redeem all that is broken and all that is lost. Here we are at the wedding and we think we're on empty. At best, we have some water. Jesus transforms and he redeems it. He sets things right and he makes things new again. Jesus, he will change our brokenness into wholeness, our weaknesses into strength, our suffering into hope. He'll change our sorrow into dancing and our mourning into joy. It's significant that in this sign that Jesus produces wine. It's not just something to grab our attention here. There's some symbolic value here that we find rooted deep in the Old Testament. Wine is a symbol of joy. In Psalm 104, the psalmist mentions wine on the list of God's great creative wonders. I didn't see chocolate on there, but I'm sure if they had chocolate back there, it'd be on there. But God lists wine, the psalmist lists wine on this list of God's creative wonders. And we read that God gives us wine as a gift to gladden our hearts. Now, of course, that can be abused and so forth or whatnot, but its original intention here is a gift to gladden our hearts. We read in Isaiah chapter 24 that as the inhabitants of the earth suffer the consequences of their actions and as judgment comes, what's one of the main signs that they see? The wine dries up. The joy is gone. The gladness is gone. The music and the singing stops. And then in the very next chapters, we see the coming of our King. We read about the kingdom to come. What happens? On this mountain, the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meats and the finest of wines. Sounds like a great party. What Jesus reveals about himself through this sign is that he's all about joy. Jesus is all about joy. This revelation that he gives us through this sign flies in the face of every message that tries to tell us that Jesus is a stick in the mud trying to wreck our fun. Jesus is all about joy. It's his goal. It's who he is. The nature of his kingdom is joy. He came that our joy might be made complete. That's John 15. Now, did you notice the details in our story about just how much wine Jesus produced at this wedding? Now, if we do the math here, there are about 6 of these 20 or 30 gallon jars. So let's split the difference and we'll call it 25. That's 150 gallons of wine, or the equivalent to 800 bottles of wine. Or to use a visual right here, one of those 5-gallon water jugs there's about 30 of those. That's a lot of wine. That's a lot of party. I think the message that he's trying to send us is that he's really, really, really serious about this joy thing. There is an abundance of joy to be found in him. There is an abundance of joy to be found in the kingdom. Now, within the story, kind of deep in the text here, there's actually this juxtaposition, this contrast between the old system, because where was the wine found? In the old stone jars that were used for the Jewish rites of purification. It's like, look, everything that you knew that used to provide you with some sort of comfort and whatnot, it's run out. And it's only by the appearance of Jesus, by his activity, that something gets made new here and made new in abundance. You ran out before, you are not running out now. The joy that you lacked before, you are going to have in abundance, because Jesus is serious about joy. There is great abundance of joy in Jesus and his kingdom. What else do we read? That not only is there an overabundance of this wine, of this joy, we also read that the new wine's a lot better. This wine that Jesus is bringing to the party, it's way better than the old stuff. Whatever we've had before, whatever our life looked at, whatever our life looked like, whatever had given us pleasure and meaning, whatever had given us identity and purpose, Jesus has something so much better in store, and it's filled with joy. It starts from the moment we say yes, and it stretches on into eternity. Jesus is joy in abundance. Jesus is pointing forward with this little thing that he does here. He is pointing forward to the plans and the promises of God. Look at this. This is simple, but this is just a foretaste in a red Cabernet, vintage 001 or 0030. This is just a foretaste of what is to come. He's pointing ultimately to the new age, the consummated kingdom, when Jesus will come again and set all things right. His word, his promise, and what he's demonstrating is that when this happens, when he comes again, there will be so much joy. So much joy. More than you can handle. More than your friends can handle. It's going to be good, because joy is who he is. Joy is what he's about. I just want to end on this thought here. From 1 John chapter 3, verse 2. What we will be has not yet been revealed. What we do know is this: when he is revealed, we will be like him, for we will see him as he is. These revelations that Jesus is giving him about himself, guess what? He's showing us a foretaste of you and me. He's showing us a foretaste of what he has for us. Receiving a revelation of Jesus is receiving a revelation of who he is making us to be. And that is really good news. Really, really good news. Amen.